Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 243, season 5, episode 30, the beginning of the fourth book of Moses, the book known as the book of Numbers, for the fifth time. I hope you are doing well. I hope you had a wonderful, glorious, and incredibly successful week. We are coming to the end of the month of May. We're coming into the month of June. In the Jewish community, we're about to celebrate another holiday, the one I think that gets the least amount of fanfare. Perhaps it should get the most, the one known in Hebrew as Shavuot, which literally translates into weeks, but is the celebration of the giving of the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, celebration of the revelation, the celebration of the covenant that was, quote unquote, signed between God and the people of Israel, the Jewish people, there then that day in the desert all those years ago, but also still today. That comes our way on Sunday evening. So those of you celebrating, happy Shavuot, Chag Sameach to you. And if you're staying up that night, because the custom is to stay up on the night of the holiday all night to learn, more power to you. It's an incredible thing to do, an incredible accomplishment, and really, hopefully, should enhance your celebration, your holiday, whatever it is you're studying, whoever it is you're studying with, whatever it is, and wherever it may be. So, happy holidays to everyone. Another note, before we record our next episode, 244 next week, I will have celebrated a birthday. That will be birthday number 50. And that's a big one. There's no way around it. And I'm not prepared to talk about it just yet. So I'm going to reserve the right to take a few minutes in next week's episode, or before next week's episode, to record a short message on, I think, what it means for me to turn 50. I still don't believe it. Okay, anyway, this week's idea, this week's thought, this week's coaching, this week's session is entitled First We Form, Then We Move. First we form, and then we move. It's an important subject, like all of them that we've talked about for 240-something weeks. Here's the scene. The book of Numbers opens. We are a year into our journey in the desert, but for no other reason simply than we sat and stayed at the Mount of Sinai, at the foot of Sinai, for a very long time. We left Egypt. We got to Sinai. We stood at Sinai. We got the commandments and the 2 tablets. We had the revelation. We had the covenantal moment with God. We stayed and we built the tabernacle, which we spent a lot of time on this year. They built the Mishkan. And now there's like phase next in this process is we're not staying in the desert forever. We got a land to go settle and live in the land of Israel, known at the time perhaps as the land of Canaan. We got to go. And so now it's time to go. And everything should be ready. And yet, Moses stops the people in their tracks. So we have to think about what's going on here. At the beginning of this book, we get a census. We get a accounting of the people. That's the census. We get an alignment. We learn where everyone's going to encamp, which tribes are near the others. And before the march towards that ultimate destiny, crossing the Jordan, entering the land, all that good stuff, fulfilling the covenant, living the covenant, being the shining light onto the nations from their home base in the land. Pause. Counts, positions. Everyone's facing inward. The tabernacle is at the center. Because there's something fundamental going on here at the beginning of this book, which too often is overlooked and is missed both in the space of learning and studying the Bible and also leading in our own spaces in our own worlds, which is this, that freedom without formation leads to collapse. Freedom without formation leads to collapse. The people are free. They're ready to go. What's holding them back? There's nothing holding them back. But what we know to be true, and we see it and you see it yourselves, is that a crowd can move. So if you're stuck in a large crowd, you're on a busy street, you're on a subway platform, and it's just a crush of people, can that group move and ultimately get to where it needs to go? Yes. But if they were organized, if they were formed in a manner that was efficient and effective, they probably would get there more quickly, more successfully, with greater impact. So freedom without formation, freedom without order, freedom without alignment is a disaster, because before movement, before the mission can take place, before that next phase in this process can happen, Moses stops them. He doesn't push them forward. He pulls them inward, because the people without formation aren't going anywhere that matters. So we get a census, we get an arrangement, we get an orientation, we get the sense of the sacred core. We can appreciate what it looks like. The tribes, and then internal to the tribes is the Levite tribe, and then internal from there in the center is the tabernacle itself. This is not like tactical in any way. This is how the people are to be formed, not to move faster, but to move more meaningfully. And meaning is part of the motion here, not just speed. I don't know if moving in this format, this squared format, is the most efficient or the most effective. They didn't move that way till this point. At least it's not clear that they did. Because the Bible doesn't tell us more than that they came unified to the mountain of Sinai. But that means that they were maybe spiritually aligned, but they were in the same boat. It doesn't say how they actually moved. There is a midrashic literature about how they crossed the sea. One idea that they crossed in tribes. But for the most part, till this moment, they're very much not tribes. They're very much a nation, but they're not organized. Over the course of time, organization takes root, because you get Moses as the leader, Aaron as the priest, you get the 70 elders, you get all that in place. You get the judges. We talked about the judges with Jethro. But in terms of the national structure, or does it matter that I belong to the tribe of Reuben as opposed to the tribe of Dan? Well, now it matters. Because now you know where you're going to live, where you're going to sleep, where you're going to be, who you're going to be next to, who you're not going to be next to. And it may well be that in the course of doing that setup, that the average person in the camp did not appreciate it completely. We know that the first person who sees, and we've talked about this before, the first person who actually sees the full encampment in all of its glory is Bilam, later on in the book of Numbers, when he sets out to try to curse them. He's the first person to view them from on high, and he is the one who tries to curse them but blesses them, but sees the encampment in all its glory. We know that now because we study the book and we see it, and we have pictures or, drawings and imaginations as to what it might be today, maybe AI version of it, but then maybe not. And so it's not here about logistics. It's not really even about efficiency. And as much as in the past I talked about this, and I think it's very much about harmony, I think what Moses is preemptively dealing with is something much bigger. And this is the core concept, perhaps, that we're going to be focusing in on in the book of Numbers this year, which is how do you lead in the wilderness? This is different. This is a different moment for Moses. It's a different moment for all the people. And then in your own work, in your own lives, in your own communities, the leadership moment shifts to maybe it's an imbalance, and maybe it's simply just a different structure, or you have different players involved, and maybe you're off mission, or you're just off, it's just not going, and you're in the wilderness. And you're like, well, how do we do this? What do I have to focus on? What do I have to avoid? What do I have to be careful about? What am I paying attention to? What am I paying attention to that nobody else is paying attention to? I'm the leader. How do I do this? And so what I think Moses is approaching here is something profound and deep, and actually quite scary if it's not attempted to be dealt with, which is what I'll call spiritual entropy. Yes, that's a heavy term. Spiritual entropy, which is what I would say is the quiet unraveling of meaning after a high, spiritual high. I want to be clear here. So in science, I'll talk about physical entropy, where systems might decay into disorder or disarray without active energy. And so because it's not continuing to persist and be active, it can fall apart. Spiritual entropy is the same idea. It's here is where the slow breakdown of clarity, of identity, of cohesion. It might be termed as spiritual drift. It doesn't look like anything at first. It's just, chilling, taking it easy. Going to take a day on our own. Maybe the spiritual sense is a bit foggy, perhaps, at that point. And one can imagine after the massive high that was the revelation at Sinai, and then the massive low that is the golden calf, and then the massive high that comes after in the building of the tabernacle of the Mishkan, of the presence of the Lord, of God resting in the camp, that now you're like in waiting mode. What do we do next? Can we move? Should we move? How do we move? Where are we going? And maybe just walking in the desert maybe isn't enough. And it starts to come apart. It starts to spread. It starts to drift. And Moses is on top of that. And he is concerned about it, as is God, obviously. And by putting the people back into action, into mode, the same way that when we built the temple, we built the tabernacle, that there was the active mode was very important post the golden calf about building something together. So here it's the formation of the community, of the unity of the people together, which is an attempt at avoiding this idea of spiritual entropy and of drift. By creating order and alignment and clarity around all those things is an attempt to avoid potential rebellion. And Moses sees this, and without intentional reinforcement, which is what he's doing here, but without the realignment of the people into specific spaces and creating sacred meaning and sacred focus by turning them inward to themselves, but also turning them directionally towards the tabernacle, which is at the center, he's trying to avoid and evade this potential disaster. And we see it in the Bible. Grumbling over food, the desire to return to Egypt, the lack of courage in the story of the spies, the tribal rivalry that explodes in the story of Korah, the turn to idolatry around the time in the story of Pinchas or Phineas later on. They're actually not random. There's symptoms of the system that has lost some form of gravity to it and seepage into it that causes and allows for the space for these things to happen. And so Moses understands is that this is not just about some sort of prophecy or being, spiritually deeply connected to God. This is system. This is the system. The temple itself, the tabernacle itself will not hold meaning at the center if it's not organized around it or people aren't oriented towards it. And that freedom by for itself, unstructured, isn't sustainable. It leads to anarchy. It leads to tragedy. And that movement, that actual movement on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis until they settle will be meaningless and can lead to collapse. And so he acts preemptively. He stops the forward momentum. He counts the people. He positions them around the tabernacle. And he ensures that every tent is facing the sacred, is facing the center. And this is a spiritual countermeasure to collapse. And think about what the things that you do. How do you organize and orient your people, your teams, family around different spaces and different moments? How do they sit when you're at an event? How does your team lay out in terms of where everyone's offices or cubes are in your office space? Communally, how does it lay out in terms of, let's say, a synagogue or a church or a mosque? Who sits where? Sounds trite, perhaps. But how do the seats turn? Where do they face? I remember years ago when I was in graduate school for education. Yes, that's a thing. I actually went to graduate school for education a million years ago. We did an exercise with one of the professors on designing the perfect classroom. It was an exercise in a teacher trying to get us to think about what would be the most conducive setup for success in a classroom. And so he was curious as to what we would want in that room or how we would situate the desks and at the time, the whiteboard and the teacher's space and who got more space and how were the kids set up. Think about the classrooms you were in. First grade, I remember we sat desk to desk. I think it was in sets of 4. But then you sat in rows, alphabetically, or by height. Hopefully not by grades or by behavior, because that would be terrible. But I think that probably happened. Or you moved into a semicircle to reorient the room around a central pillar, a central focus, a central person, whatever it may be. But that orientation is what helps to maintain and to foster the freedom that you're looking to create. So as a leader, you have ample opportunity to think about how that's going to be, how that's going to look, how that's going to work. And you can tinker with it, you can play with it, you can figure it out. I mentioned it once before, maybe at least once before, in Coaching the Bible as well. When I started in the rabbinate and I had an office in the synagogue, I had a small office in the synagogue, and when I got in there, it was set up a certain way physically. This is a thing I did everywhere I ever been to where I had an office. I rearranged the furniture on the first day. It was just a thing. It, I think, drove people crazy because they would come in. I remember in that space in the synagogue, I came in the next week and it had been moved back. In another place where I had worked, same thing, that the custodial crew had moved all the furniture, the desk and the chair and the computer back to where it was before. And I had to explain to them that for me, that sort of sacred space worked in that way that I wanted it and not the way that they had wanted it before. That's like my version of feng shui. But you have to think about that. And when there's an opportunity to do that preemptively, like at the outset, to orchestrate how that's going to go for the future and not reactively later on, that's an opportunity. And so Moses takes that opportunity to help form the team into the spaces and the places that are going to be best and most accurately and effectively and efficiently and meaningfully suited for the people where they're going to be. And so it fits in very beautifully to something we talked about way back, Coaching the Bible, about teams, the idea of Bruce Tuckman's group development model, 1965. I didn't learn it in 1965, but that would make me 60 this week and not 50. Goodness gracious God. Anyway, 1965, Bruce Tuckman introduced the idea of group dynamics, which is used in team building and leadership, organizational development. And what he described is the 4 stages of group development, what are called forming, storming, norming, and then performing. And that they really have to have that in that sequence. We talked about it way back. I'm not going to go into all of it. But basically, every single step of that is crucial for the success of the group dynamic development over the course of time. And the first stage of that is what's called forming. So people are polite. They're not sure about who everybody is. They're seeking clarity. There is ambiguity around everything. Roles are unclear. Trust is weak and fragile, and alignment hasn't yet formed. So what Moses is doing, and what Tuckman talks about there, is the idea that before the team can perform at its highest level, it has to be organized. And this forming stage has to happen. And this forming stage of the people has actually happened. And so they went through forming, and they went through a little bit of the storming stage, which is the conflict space. They've done a little bit of that. They're going to do more of that. But the truth be told, because of what Moses has done here, that's actually limited. I know it's wild rebellions, but it's actually limited because of the structure and the organization and the orientation of the community. Number 3 is the norming phase, where the shared norms and values and trust begins to take shape, cohesion begins to develop, and then ultimately is performing. The team becomes high functioning, highly successful, adaptive, and mission driven. They're not optional. The people here have received the 10 Commandments. They have built a tabernacle. They have lived through foundational moments together, but they are not yet formed into a people who fully, completely, absolutely trust one another, completely, fully, and absolutely understand their shared purpose, their shared mission, and can carry that forward. We take it for granted they're the 12 tribes. But the truth, as we mentioned before in other places in Coaching the Bible, each one of the tribes has a unique personality. We know, symbolically speaking, and the Bible mentions this, each one of the tribes sits or has its own flag, which seems like a strange concept. But this flag is an identifier, and so it has a color, that's all to its own. It belongs uniquely to each one of the tribes. Everyone can identify with it. It's their flag. You're a fan of a team? Same idea. I'm a New York guy, so I'm a Knicks, Rangers, Mets, Jets fan. Goodness gracious, God, after 50 years, perhaps I should reevaluate that. But I always joke about bleeding the blue and orange of the Mets and the Knicks, or the green and the white of the Jets. The Rangers I care a lot less about these days. It's an identifier. It's my tribe, my people. And so when you skip this stage of forming, of this, putting the people into the spaces where they need to belong, of orienting them properly, of formation for them in the right way, you get to storming right away. Because storming is coming. It is absolutely coming. And you got to be ready for it. And so how do you get ready for that? Orientation, formation, order, structure. Because if the conflict comes too early, you get fractures. People don't know where they belong. They get lost. They get flustered. Anxiety sets in. The tension sets in. People make mistakes. They do something wrong. Everybody regrets it later. And so what happens ultimately in the Bible here is perhaps there isn't enough time in the forming stage before the storming begins to happen. So the complaining starts, and then the lack of courage comes in. And then you get all the other things that are going to rule in the book. And so Moses attempts to stem the tide that's going in that way that only he sees. By creating identity through census, by creating belonging through tribal placement, by creating a sense of grounding the people by having that sacred orientation towards the center, he's hoping and expecting and working to build a trust before the testing comes in, to create order before the movement comes in, to align the people before asking them to endure what lies ahead. So forming as a formative first stage, not just good strategy, it's how you attempt to save and secure and ultimately accomplish the mission. And so that's the structure here. That's what's going on here. If you look at the commentaries, they all talk about the structure here. Nachmanides, that is Rabbi Moses ben Nachman, not Maimonides, but Nachmanides, for all those playing at home, makes the comment that the structure of the square surrounding the center is mirroring the structure on high in the heavens of excuse me, there's a mosquito on my ear. Okay, maybe I'll try to get that out. Is the idea of mirroring the structure in heaven of the chair or the throne of God and the surrounding of God by the angels and the forces around. So you're shaping the people into something sacred, into something meaningful, something holy, and orienting them towards the middle. And if it's not done, yes, they could travel in a different way. They could walk in a straight line. They could walk in a semicircle. They could walk holding hands, singing Kumbaya. They could do all kinds of things. But what happens if they go in that different order, then the tabernacle is lost. People can't see it. Maybe they move by speed because some people are faster than others. The Levite tribe, which is centered in this structure, gets lost. No one sees or faces or thinks about anything holy. So they're moving, but they're not meaning. And that's dangerous. And so what we need here then is a unifying principle of what's going on here, what's necessary for the people. And there's this great idea by Karl Weick called sensemaking, which I think actually applies here beautifully. Sensemaking in a space of uncertainty. Sensemaking is how people construct meaning when facing complexity, disruption, or ambiguity. Sensemaking is the process of interpreting the moment, of anchoring identity during chaos, of building shared understanding when certainty disappears. And so Reich writes, that 3 times fast, the central issue is not truth and getting it right, but continued sense-making and updating. In other words, people don't need the right answers all the time. They do need coherence. They do need updates. They do need the sense that order exists and that they're going to be okay. And so here in the book of Numbers, it matters because they had Exodus, they had the Revelation, they had the tabernacle being built. And now it's like, what's next? And they don't know. And if they simply just start marching and walking in the desert towards some destination, maybe they know how to get there, maybe they don't. Maybe they know the route and maybe they don't. Maybe they know which enemies are nearby and maybe they don't. Everything becomes a mess. Tabernacle's background noise, the tribal movement, some people move faster, some people move slower. It's not intentional, it's not purposeful, it's not mission driven. Everything fragments. And in collapse, right, Weick Weick, did I say it's Weick? Goodness gracious. Weick writes the following statement. In collapse, it's not the lack of resources that kills people, it's the lack of meaningful structures. And so Moses is creating sense making here. He's orienting the people, he's orienting their souls, he's orienting their spirituality, he's orienting their mission towards the center, towards a visual structure, towards the place of ritual, towards that sense of cohesion and coherence around everyone around them. And so what helps to then avoid is that if I can look up in the morning one day and see, oh, I see the tabernacle in the center, great, that helps me stay engaged. If I see Moses on his way to the study hall, okay, the mission lives on. If I see the different tribes interacting with each other, but I see the separation between them and I see how all the families live beautifully, so then there's internal structure, and that works for me, and that gives me some sense of calm or pause or belief that what we're doing is actually real and serious. And so here, that sense of alignment is really crucial. Really. And so ask yourself, dear leader, as we close out this episode, what is your tabernacle? What's the sacred center for your leadership or for your team that helps to orient you and them? Either orienting the team towards the work or orienting you in your own life towards the meaning and the sacred center of your own life. Do the people know where they stand, or is there ambiguity and that sense of misalignment, almost potentially, God forbid, chaos as to where they stand or what they stand for, or they don't? That's a dangerous question to ask. People know the mission. Sometimes they don't. And that explains a lot as to why things are happening and why they're not good in certain moments. But have you built a structure for orientation before moving forward? Now, it's not to say that if you have a team of 50 and you're starting with one and you're thinking already how that's going to look when you get there. That's not what I mean. But you've thought about it. You've considered, what do I want it to look like potentially? I don't have all the details. I don't have it fully formed. And so, yes, on some level, earlier on in the process, you're moving slower because you want to know why you're moving. You want to be sure that you're clear around the why of the movement, and not that it's some sort of haphazard action that simply just fills the space of something's happening here. I just don't know what it is. That doesn't work. And to close it out then is the following, and then with a quote. A census will give you the numbers. The map will give you your position. But only the leader gives you the orientation, a sense of who you are, where you face, and why it matters. Moses wasn't looking to delay the journey. He's preserving the purpose, because in the wilderness, when you lead in the wilderness, only the sacred order can hold people together. And to end it out with a quote, as we always do, an unknown quote, freedom without formation is actually erosion in disguise. The leader's first task is not to advance the people, but to ground them in sacred purpose and in shared order. That is Coaching the Bible for this week. Look forward to seeing you next week. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. Those of you celebrating the holiday coming up, Chag Sameach, happy holiday. In English, it's Pentecost. In Hebrew, it's Shavuot. It's weeks. It's a celebration of the revelation. It's a huge, hugely important holiday for us. Happy holiday. Happy birthday to me, if I can say that out loud. And look forward to seeing you next week.